Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Podcast, where we cut the small talk and have conversations of substance. Today, this lovely guest of mine, I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Gabrielle. I'm the founder and CEO of Grain of Arcane. I'm also a mental health advocate. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here today and I'm ready to, just get into a conversation.
Yes, and today our topic for the conversation is dealing with childhood trauma and mental health in BIPOC communities. So, my first question for you is you've already talked about it a little bit, you introduced it, but tell me about your brand because I know you do combine art and mental health. So, can you tell me a little bit about your brand and what you do?
I actually created my brand through overcoming my struggles with mental health. I'm at a really young age. I was like 10 years old. And I think that art has always been something that has just been like a talent, but also just a passion of mine. And so really with the brand, I really wanted to kind of bring that feeling to other people that I had, when like art really saved my life. And yeah, I mean, I do so many things with the brand, like from art, fashion, even like the event hosting. Um, and really the main thing is really just like bringing the community together. Because I feel like, in times like that, we're nothing without community. And a lot of times we really just need to just like trace back to our roots and, be more connected with our people.
Facts. I definitely agree with that. It's definitely a multifaceted brand, which I really appreciate because you do a lot of things that do touch on mental health, but it's also very creative. So that's why I really fuck with your brand.
For sure, for sure. I really appreciate the support and um I really appreciate you for also being at like the events too. I know like you've been able to kind of see things in real time, from like the events and the products and stuff. So I really appreciate you on that end too.
Of course. And it's always a vibe. It's always a vibe. So, I'm always going to pull up and support. What is a childhood trauma that you would say that you've dealt with, big or small, that you feel like made an impact on your adult life?
I think for me, something that I had to overcome was growing up in a split family. That was something that was kind of like, I don't know, I feel like for a while I went through an identity crisis because I kind of got like the best of like three worlds because I
Mhm.
had, my biological parents and my stepmother. So it was like, I kind of was like in a piece of like three people's worlds. And growing up, me and my mom didn't have the best relationship. And so I think that also contributed a lot to not just my adulthood, but just like me finding myself and also just like becoming a lady for real because for a while, like my dad did a lot of the like raising.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that kind of just like was something that I would say was like a challenge to overcome because um like I said, I went through an identity crisis for a while, and for a while it felt like, even though I had like three places that, I guess I could call home, like I didn't really feel like I was at home at like any of those places. Um, so it was a lot of adapting.
And so when you say you haven't felt like you were at home any of those places, I definitely could relate with that statement. But how, like, what was it, or was there a place that you went to, or even just like whether it be even physical or elsewhere that you felt like was home in those times?
I think a lot of times, like in those situations, things that felt like home to me was definitely like going to my grandparents' house for the summer. That was
Mm-hmm.
something I used to do for a while. Um, Also just like really just hanging out with friends because like I'm also an only child.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to just like, you know, finding other things to do and building relationships with other people, a lot of that was really just through like the friends that I had and the people who were around me in like different settings too.
Okay. Okay. And like, how did you cope with trauma back then, and how different do you feel like it is now with, not necessarily trauma, but like anything that you feel like you're dealing with that is a struggle?
I know like when I was younger, like I did therapy for a little, but when you're a kid, I mean, there are a lot of things that you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
and can't really make sense of in a sense to where you can really articulate it to other people. So that was kind of short-lived. But one thing that I did for a while was I would basically like write my own stories. I used to write a lot when I was younger because, like I said, I didn't really have that many people that I was connected to.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of like, I don't know, like made my own like reality through writing, I guess. And I think that just being able to like write my own stories, like basically I rewrote like how I would want my like situations to play out. Like
Mm-hmm.
even though like it might have like played out negative like in real life, I would write like an alternative reality of like how it would have been. And I think that like replaying those things in my mind kind of just helped me like maintain sanity in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, with the combination of, like sketching and all that types of stuff. Thinking back on it, I think I kind of got the passion from like, I don't know if you remember like the Wattpad era
Mm-hmm.
and like the fan fictions and stuff. And so I was like, all these people are writing fan fictions about like their favorite characters, but why don't we write like fan fictions about ourselves? Like,
Fact. People talk about it all the time now. Like you can rewrite your story, like as a form of like manifesting and stuff like that. Like I feel like everything that you put on paper, and if there's some action behind it, like that's like casting spells. You know what I mean?
yeah, I definitely see where you're going with that. And
Yeah.
that's so funny. Like I didn't even think about it in that way of like manifesting. But I guess in a sense, like that's definitely what was going through my head. Like maybe if I just like change the trajectory of these stories, like one day it'll like be my reality, I guess.
And so, like, I know you said that you had. My next question was, did you have any experience with therapy? But you answered that, and so you said it was short lived. But do you feel like being exposed to therapy at a young age, did you feel like that helped you any?
Being exposed to it didn't really help in the way that you think it would because um like I said, there were so many different factors going on in my life, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that one because it didn't I don't even know if I did therapy more than like a year. It was probably less than like a year. But I think that because there were so many different variables in my life, it was just kind of like a weird place in life to kind of gauge the impact. But I did like look into therapy in my most recent years, like within the past couple years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I tried that. It was okay, but I feel like it wasn't as like substantial as I would have, I guess like the way that my expectations were. But I think that people mistake therapy for like a quick remedy type thing. And also like there are different forms of therapy that work for different people. And I think it's really just like finding the types of therapy or things that are therapeutic to you that really just like makes sense in your life because things look different for other people. And I think that it also is kind of in the sense of like it's like work, like what you put in is what you get out. And so I think that too, like being honest with yourself in those situations and like really just like, okay, I'm paying this person to solve this problem, but like, am I willing to actually tell them what the problem is, or am I gonna like beat around the bush? But at the same time, it's kind of hard too, because like on one end, it's like you're ready for change in your life, but then, sometimes things are easier said than done because like when you're sitting there talking to the person, at the end of at the end of the day, like these are all things that we still have to face and overcome. And sometimes things may be bigger than we've made it seem to like deal with it, if that makes sense.
So when you went to therapy, was it something that like you had the inclination of doing, or was it something that like your folks like was like, hey, maybe you should do this?
Younger years, it was definitely like them pushing it, and I think that's why like it wasn't as impactful because it was like I don't know, it was kind of like I felt like I was being treated like a case study in a sense. Like
Okay.
I feel like it's kind of different for me because like I'm the type of person I like to talk to people I know that like actually have a like regard for what I'm saying. Like actually like have some type of care of what I'm saying rather than like me just talking to somebody who like they're only listening to me because I paid them to. You know what I
Fact.
mean? Like I
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of like what would go through my head because like sometimes it's like okay, like I'm paying you to listen to me, but I don't even know if I'm like receiving the assistance that I think that I would. But then again, I think that also just stems from like trying different therapists and seeing which one works for you because like every therapist isn't the same. Like they all deal with like what you have going on differently, like in a different demeanor.
Yeah. So, what are some generational curses that you feel like you currently would like to change, or like working on changing?
One, of course, being the obvious, like just raising more awareness to mental health. In a lot of situations, people say one thing but do another. And I think that when you really, really like make people aware of different things, not just in other people, but also within themselves, like that can ultimately like change your family dynamic. Um, Especially like in my situation too, just like continuing the conversation and, also just like sometimes you have to just tell people like the harsh truth of like
Mm-hmm.
roles that they played in your life, like especially if you're trying to like make the relationship better. You do have to have the hard conversations. Nothing gets resolved without communication, and so I think that's really a big thing as well. um Not shutting people out. I think that a generational curse is um everybody kind of just like steps on each other's toes without actually like making room for the next person. And what I really mean by that is like, a lot of times like in like family dynamics and family situations, it's always like I don't know, some people take things as like a competition of like who can rule over the other person the most, but like at the end of the day, like we're family, it shouldn't be like a competition of who has the authority over somebody. At the end of the day we all just should love each other. um and I think that's like a big thing too. Like a lot of people have like toxic family situations that stem from like people's own personal problems, but like they
Mm-hmm.
inflict it on like the family itself.
Yeah.
And that all like ultimately still stems from like just being like mentally aware in yourself and making those changes within yourself so that like when you have relationships with other people, whether it be family, friends, actual relationships like boyfriend, girlfriend, or even like work settings, like you don't run into these issues with everybody that you encounter because, you're constantly like put like having these things in the back of your mind and just like trying to work on it. A lot of times people do unto other people what's done to them. And I think that's really where like breaking the generational curse really is like making the conscious decision that, okay, I went through this, but I know that this wasn't okay. So I'm going to do whatever I need to do within myself to make sure that, whether my kids or my friends or whomever it may be, I don't treat them how I was treated because I know that it was wrong. That's really where like not letting the cycle repeat itself really stems from. And one thing that um, one of the panelists said at the Mind Over Millions event was that, we were talking about mental health and we were talking about families and just people in general. And um, he made a point that, everybody wants to talk, everybody has something to say, right? Everybody always has something negative to say, but they're not willing to put in the work to help you get to where they want you to be, right? And so a great example of this is like, people saying like, hey, I think you need to go to therapy, this and that, blah, 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 right? But then when it comes time for, like, let's say you improve yourself, through therapy and you try to apply that in your relationships with other people, and, they're looking at you a certain type of way because you're trying to implement, these like healthy habits and, relationships that you've been taught and that you've even just been, like disciplined to learn. And sometimes people kind of see it as like a one up thing, and it's like, no, I'm not trying to one up you. I'm just trying to be just like I'm trying to be the best version of myself, you should want to be the best version of yourself, you know? And especially if you can see things in people and know that it's, not sane or whatever, these are the same expectations that we should hold ourselves to, right? Because if we're not doing it within ourselves, how do we expect other people to do that as well, especially if we're not setting that example?
Like me with like my relationship and like my family, I'm probably the person in my family who is doing those like things to, make sure certain things end with me. And so I've noticed like in the black community, like anything that you do that's not what your folks want, or that is even just different than what has been over time, is seen as like disrespect. And it's like, is it really disrespect, or is it just some new shit because the shit that y'all doing is not working? You know what I'm saying? Or the shit that y'all doing is toxic and y'all's been doing this for a while, but instead of like actually going to get help or going to learn new ways of thinking, being, and doing, y'all are just like, okay, yeah, we just gonna keep doing this.
Right. No, I definitely agree with that, and I think that a lot of times people are just stuck in their old ways, like everybody wants change, but they're not willing to put the work in. And I think that we just have to break that cycle, not just from the mental health standpoint, but just in general, right? Because we can't expect for things to change. We can't expect for things to get better if we're not actually willing to, put ourselves in a uncomfortable position to, be comfortable in who we are.
And then so like I would then ask, like, how do you navigate those type of people? Like when you notice that there's people who have that resistance to change for the better, like what how do you navigate those situations?
I think for me, I always say like sometimes you just have to love people from a distance. Because I'm really big on protecting your energy. And I think that that just stems from, you know, who you surround yourself around, what you allow people to do upon you. And sometimes you also just have to kill people with kindness. Like, okay, you want to be a weirdo for no reason, that's cool. I'm gonna still be the person that I am, and hopefully that'll inspire you to be a better person. Because at the end of the day, like as long as you stay true to yourself and what's on your heart, everybody else just looks dumb.
Facts.
Like you look dumb being mean to a nice person. You
Facts.
know,
And it says a lot
so
about you. It says a lot about you as well. So
yeah, for sure. I think that it takes a special somebody to be the bigger person in certain situations. And a lot of times it's hard, but I think that when you know that you have ascended past that point, ascended past that level, it's like, I'm not even going to let myself revert back to these old ways because I've already worked so hard to get past that. And we all like have our moments where we fall short of it, but it's really just making a conscious decision of like, you know what? I could have done this, I could have said that, but because I know better, I'm going to do better. It's not even worth my time, not even worth my energy because my spirit is, so far elsewhere that that little thing is really just not worth it.
that was like definitely my lesson all last year. Just like these are like little tests, and don't all the work that you've done, don't let these little tests undo all of that. Like these are tests to see if you actually going to, stay true to who you are, or if you're actually going to, like you said, revert back to all your old ways.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, it's also just a thing of like you said, like reverting back to your old ways. It's all a test of who do you want to be? Do you want to be the same person you were yesterday, or do you want to be a new person today? You know,
Facts.
do you want to be better than who you were yesterday? Like, are you trying to be better than tomorrow? Like, what's,
Or are you just
really
trying to
just
stay stagnant, like question.
right. And then the
Facts.
funny thing about that is like the same people who aren't willing to change, they don't understand why the things around them haven't changed, like why they're in the same position that they were a year from then or months from then. And it's like you're in the same position that you were because you weren't willing to take that leap of faith. You weren't ready to take that walk. So until you decide to take two steps forward, you're still going to be two steps backward.
Facts. And I also feel like those type of people have that whole victim mentality. And instead of, taking that look at yourself and realizing, hey, I might be the problem, or hey, essentially we are the creators of our own lives. And the reason why I'm in situations that I'm in is essentially because of me. Like, people would much rather point the finger and blame other people or blame other circumstances.
For sure. I think that a lot of people lack accountability. Part of adulting literally is being able to take accountability and say, hey, I was wrong, you know, or even like in your relationships with other people, like everything requires some type of compromise, right? And so one thing that I see often is like a lot of times people will feel like they're not wrong in a situation because they didn't see it. But we don't see how we come off to other people. And so even when our intentions are pure, but it makes somebody feel a certain way, we have to also take accountability of the fact that, I didn't mean for this to come off this way, but now that I know that this is one of your triggers, I know not to cross that boundary moving forward because I respect you and your boundaries.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I also like feel like there are those people who expect people to, because you use the word trigger. There are those people who expect people to tiptoe over their triggers. So the same way that we are holding other people accountability for not coming off a certain way, I also feel like we need to hold ourselves accountable and know that, hey, you might be somebody who's easily triggered. That doesn't mean that people have to walk on eggshells around you. That means you need to heal whatever is triggering you.
No, I definitely agree with that. And that's 100% true. I see that a lot in like trauma bonds. Also speaking from experience, um, just like having similarities with somebody else, on like those similar feelings or let's say those similar triggers, right? Um, and then, they want you to just like kind of be a doormat. Like just let them walk all over you because of what they have going on. And it's like, while I respect some things and I have compassion for some things, I'm also still a person,
Mhm.
at the end of the day. I have triggers, I have feelings. Outside of triggers, I have feelings, you know. Um, and one of the realest quotes I've heard is people don't treat you how you should be treated. They treat you how they feel in that moment. And that's so real because how people treat you a lot of times is a reflection of how they feel, um, not just within themselves, but also how they feel about you, right? Because even like when we're going through, certain things, we still have the decision to make of if we're going to, like respect like what they have going on, or if we're just gonna like ignore that. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's kind of like a twofold thing because on one end it's like no, I'm not going to bow down to like everything, but also at the same time we also have to be realistic like when it comes to like building relationships with people and also just getting to know everybody, right? Because it's also a thing of like a lot of times we don't know like what somebody is going through or even like what their life looks like
Mhm.
until we, get to know them or as they continue to talk about it. And so I think that, while it's a thing of no, don't walk on eggshells, also just mostly just like being mindful of the fact that like you aren't the only person that has stuff going on. So, essentially treat everybody how you would want to be treated. If you don't want people treating you a certain way, then don't treat your friend or whoever a certain way. Because then when it comes time that you really need somebody to be there, they're not going to want to be there because of how you treated them, like all that time.
A lot of people talk about grace, and I always be like, do you extend grace to people the same way you're expecting grace? But at the same time, do you extend that same grace to yourself that you give to others? Because I feel like that's all that it really is. Like, people, like you were even saying in the beginning of the conversation, like, people don't really hold space for people to be human beings, which is what we are. Like, I feel like when you meet somebody or whatever, like, you kind of have this, well, you really shouldn't, but I'm noticing more and more, like through just like witnessing this and just like being a victim of this, like people have these certain ideas of how you should be or what they thought you should be like, and then when they finally meet you and they finally see like, oh, like this person is a human being, like they have emotions, they go through the motions, they this, they that, they're kind of thrown off. But it's like you are probably also somebody who is a human being who goes through the motion, who feel one way one day and feel another way a different day, but you're expecting that grace from people. So I feel like everybody should be extending that grace as well to other people, like you said.
Right. I agree. It's really just a matter of putting yourself in other people's shoes at the end of the day.
Yeah, for sure. So how do you improve your mental health when you feel like you're not at 100%? Like, what is some of your self-care go-tos?
One of my things that I try to do like on a weekly basis is the self-care day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is just like one day. So for me, like this year, this was like on every Monday. And if I didn't do Monday, I pick one day where I substituted. And so basically what I would do is on the self-care day, I was dedicated to doing something that made me happy. And this doesn't necessarily have to be something that involves spending money either, right? It doesn't have to be a spa day. It could just be something as simple as I'm gonna go out and take a walk, and then after that, I'm gonna go see a movie, or whatever that looks like for you. And I think that that's something that also kind of keeps me going because every week it's always something new. Realistically, every day is always something new.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that just like really like blocking off those mental health days or like just breaks in your day kind of just helps you get through it. Um, Something that I like to do like on a daily basis is like I have a dog, so I give him walks and stuff. But even outside of me having to walk him, like let's say I've been at the computer for a while, let me take a 5-10 minute walk, just like clear my head, get away from the computer, get some vitamin D, let my blood circulate. Um, and so a lot of times it's just those little things like that. I think another thing for me is, of course, creating. Sometimes when I'm really, really busy, creating can be like a chore thing just because like sometimes my energy isn't there. But I realized that creating, the great thing about art is that art is limitless. Like there's no right or wrong way to quote unquote create art. And so I think that sometimes it could just be something as simple as, you know what, I don't feel like getting out all of my beads and cleaning them up, but I may feel like, you know, drawing a picture or, just like whatever comes to mind. Yeah. I mean, it looks so many different ways for me. Really just depends on like the day and just how I'm feeling. But like I said, just the time blocks, making time for yourself outside of all of your other obligations. Because if you're not making time for yourself, you can't possibly think that you're going to be able to be 100% in everything else that you're trying to be present for.
I definitely took like the pressure off of creating so that it didn't feel like as much of a chore for me, and I just doing things just because, and also just like not having that mindset of, cuz like I create for therapeutic reasons, but like a lot of my friends also create because this is how they make money, and so I also extended that to them, like outside of creating what you're creating to make money, create something just for the fuck of it, just for fun, that you don't feel like you need to sell, but just do it just because.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like definitely where I'm at right now, especially like with my business, because for me, like for a while, like I said, it started out as a hobby, but then I think like when you try to turn things into business, it kind of takes on like a different meaning and just also like different obligations.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for me, like just making the conscious decision of, like unless it's like a custom order or something, what I have is what I am going to give y'all, and that's going to be that. When I'm feeling more inspired, I'll make something, and when I have my recharge and my energy is back up, I'll make something new. Because at the end of the day, I'm not saying, you know, be lazy, but also at the same time, you can't. be present in business, work, school, whatever, if you aren't taking that time to make sure that you're being present for yourself. So, um, the breaks are needed, despite what people say, like the breaks are really what makes everything like bearable, you
Yeah.
know?
And fresh and just like you said, like for me, I feel like the breaks are what keeps me loving my craft. Like if I feel like it's starting to become something that's like, oh, I have to do this 24/7, or
Yeah,
like I went to a I was on a panel probably it was like maybe 2 months ago, and we were just talking about like safe spaces within the art, like the creative community and everything. And like there was this one lady who, I forgot what the question was, but like her follow up response was like, "No, y'all need to be creating like production, production, production." And like we had to tell her like, "You're looking at that from a consumer mindset. As a creative, we're not robots." And for people like I said, who do things for therapeutic reasons, I'm not producing so that I can, you know post reels. And like no knock to the people who are doing the real thing and just like doing the consecutive posting on social media, but I'm not doing that just so that I can like get my follows up. Like the things that I actually create like me have a meaning for me. So it's not ever going to be like a production type of thing. It's going to be a, like you said, whatever I have to give, this is what you guys are getting.
right. And I think that, when you change your mindset like that too, it takes the pressure off of yourself because, like, I know for me, that was the mindset I would have for pop-ups. And even now, sometimes I kind of fall short of just like trying not to beat myself up last minute. Like, oh my gosh, do I have enough items? Because honestly, 9 times out of 10, it's more than enough. And at the end of the day, if somebody really, really wants something, I may not have it right now, but I can always make it for you. Or if you're willing, the ones who are willing to wait will wait. And so, yeah, it's really just being kinder to yourself and just still allowing yourself to have the freedom to create, right? Because when it becomes so demanding, it's no longer a freedom behind it. I feel like it becomes a thing of you're no longer like creating, you're more so just like trying to survive in that moment.
Yeah, or I feel like it kind of turns into like a, maybe you're doing things out of desperation. And like you said, at that point it just doesn't, it's not fun anymore. So I definitely like to always check in with myself as far as like when I'm what I'm creating, what I'm putting out, like versus like, oh, am I putting out enough? Am I doing this? Should I be doing this every day? Should I be doing, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I definitely think that that's important, that the breaks are important, and just like taking that pressure off of yourself when it comes to your craft, because at the end of the day, like it's your craft, and I feel like you should have fun with it, and you should be doing things just because like you love to do it instead of like, oh, I'm trying to, like you said, be on some survival shit. Yeah, so do you feel like society is a safe space for people regarding mental health?
I say yes and no. So I would say now, I mean, compared to like years ago, mental health is a widely talked about subject. And I think that things are starting to get better just on the side of like increasing mental health awareness and, implementing things like, for example, like at school, we have like wellness days, which is like, it's basically like how we used to have like the professional development days, but they call them wellness days because it's a, you know, wellness break from the day to day. And so I think that things like that, show that like change is being made. But on one end, I think that mental health is still a shaky subject because with mental health awareness also comes mental health excuses. Um, and what I mean by that is like a lot of times people, instead of like doing the inner work, which is just, self-reflecting and doing the work inside yourself, people make excuses for titles that society has told them, you know, and they use that as an excuse to not actually do work on it. And so I think that, with the increased mental health awareness also came that negative side of like, okay, now everybody is just using all these terms and self-diagnosing loosely, and it becomes a thing of like, well, what is even right or wrong even anymore?
I feel like you said, like we are starting to, push the buttons of mental health and starting to talk about it, and they just talked about more, like even just like June being men's mental health month, like they know people weren't talking about that before. And I like that kind of makes me happy that we are talking about that now. But like on, like you said, on the other end, I do feel like some in society, like the fast paced environment and just like there's not really safe enough spaces for people to just have breakdowns. You know what I'm saying? Like we're in this society, we're always seen to, oh, you got to keep going, 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 you got to be on go, you got to be on go. You can't like stop and cry. You can't stop and like process your feelings. And I think that's like a big thing, is like a lot of times people don't even take that pause to like process things that have happened to them. They're just continuously going on and on with life until like they eventually snap one day. And so I would like to really just see society push for more safe spaces for people to just go through the motions, go through the mess, and, you know, introduce new ways of, or just introduce like better ways of not coping. I don't like to say that word, but just like better ways of dealing.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that one thing that's like the number one contributor is just like politics, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
and not from the standpoint of like who's going to be our next president, but you know, demographics. One of my when I did the mental health event back in May, the topic actually Mind Over Millions was focusing on the correlation between financial literacy, and underserved communities, specifically like the Black community, Hispanics, and things like that, and how that contributes to our mental health. And you know, everybody in the room agreed that even just from your financial status, that can contribute to your mental health, because we live in a society where nothing is free.
Mm-hmm.
So money revolves around everything, revolves around money. And especially now, after COVID, some of the biggest things that people are dealing with are homelessness, right? Not having a decent meal to eat, not having quality clothes on their backs. I mean, not even having money to get their hair done so their hair isn't, tangled and hurting them. I mean, there's so many different factors, but I think that it all stems from our our society, right? I mean, when people made the Constitution and they said everybody was created equal, that was made at a time where not everybody was even created equally, right? I mean, slavery was still going on and everything else. And so, even now, as we're continuing to rewrite these laws that had no consideration of, BIPOC people, I think that it's still a stigma around that, and it's still a lot of work that has to be done for us to live, comfortably. The statistics have actually shown that 10% of African Americans don't even have health insurance. And while that may seem like a small number, I mean, that's bigger than you think it is, right? And of the people who have health insurance, a lot of the options still aren't affordable or may not be compatible with the type of health insurance they have. And outside of all of that, I mean, when you go into, for example, communities that are low income, right? You don't see any mental health clinics or anything like that very often in communities like that. And if you do, you know, a lot of times those places are, right where the line becomes a gentrified area or something like that. And, you know, we're really the people who need it. Um, Statistically, we're the ones who suffer the most with mental health issues, but we're also the ones who seek mental health resources the less. This is a very crazy statistic, but 63% of African Americans believe that mental health is a sign of weakness, from like the generational curse aspect, right? Because things start at home, right? It starts when you're young. And I think a lot of that still stems from one, not seeing these types of places in our communities, but two, not having that support, from the family standpoint of even being able to have these conversations and talk about it in the first place.
Yeah, and so I was having this conversation the other day with a couple of my friends, and I wanted to ask you, do you feel like we are in that phase of like parenting our parents?
Yes.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that as well. Like, I think it's
I
a
feel
really,
like I'm in that phase right now, honestly. But I
do
think that's because our generation is like more aware of said things. And I was just talking to my partner about this, and I was just saying, my generation is very like outspoken. Like we're very like, I don't want to say we're very like my way or the highway, but we're like, we just have a different way of thinking. And I think for us, we're the type of generation where we are no longer allowing people to gaslight us, right? We're no longer walking on eggshells. We're no longer tolerating or continuing, these generational curses. And I think for us, it's just a thing of, like you said, like some people in our generation are more violent, but I think that stems from unresolved, mental issues and also a lot of the things that are going on in the world. Um, but there's equally as many people who want better situations, right? There's equally as many people who don't want to be toxic or don't want to be in toxic environments. And I think that when it's a situation of when you know better, you do better, right? I mean, if I know better, why wouldn't I show my parents or my family or whoever how we can have a better relationship and just continue to grow in that aspect?
facts. And so, like, so have you been having like certain conversations with your parents, and do you feel like they're kind of getting on board, or do you feel like you still kind of get met with like some resistance?
I feel like so yes, but I feel like it's a combination of the two. And I think that it also depends on like which parent it is because, you know, some people have different like reactions to different things. But I do think that it's a combination of the two, right? Trying to get better, but also being resistant. And I think that one thing about it is a lot of people fear what they don't know. And so a lot of times people just are afraid of change, right? I mean, we want change, but when we start putting in the work to get that change and we see that it's not all that it cracked up to be, it's a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I get that. But I think that people just have to continue to be diligent and just continue to remind themselves that, especially from the parent standpoint, if you make the decision to become better in that aspect, mentally and physically, you can show up better for your children, and whoever else is in the family.
People are afraid, and this is something that kind of like blew my mind at first when I realized it, but people are kind of afraid to change, which I feel like shouldn't ever be a fear of anyone's, because like people think that okay, if I start like developing new habits and this, like I'm no longer going to be myself. But I feel like to be on this planet and to have the same thought patterns and to have the same habits that you've had when you were a teenager and you're probably like maybe 40 now, like I feel like that is something that is scary to me. Like as humans, we are here to evolve. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like people should not ever be afraid to like become someone new, because essentially like you said, that's what we're doing every day. Are you going to be somebody different today, or are you going to be the same person that you was yesterday, you know?
You put it in the best position, are you going to make the decision to be better than who you were yesterday? um it's really just the principle of that, right? Just trying to continue to elevate and just being a bigger person to yourself. Hey, I want better for myself, not I want better for other people, but I want better for myself. I want this for myself because once I get this for myself, then I can pour this out into other people.
Facts. That's a big one right there. Being a bigger person to yourself. But yeah, I feel like we have come to like a wrap up of our conversation, and I do have some closing cues for you.
Of course, of course. Thank you
So
again for having me.
Yes, of
This
course.
was
This
an
conversation.
amazing conversation.
Yes, yes. I always love to talk about mental health just because I feel like it's very important. I feel like people don't really talk about it enough because they're afraid of, whatever. They're just not used to it. But I get it. More conversations like this hopefully will be had. And like you said, like you did the Mind Over Millions thing. I really wish I would have attended that because it seemed like it was a really good conversation.
It definitely was. It definitely was. And one thing that I really did like about the event, like you were talking about, like June being Men's Mental Health Month. Most of my panelists and most of the people that showed up were actually males. And so it was a different feeling for me because, I'm so used to seeing a lot of females in those spaces. And, one of the things that I told myself was, how can I, do more stuff for the guys? How can I get the guys out here? And just the fact that the guys really like came and showed up and showed out was really just a full circle moment for me. Um, Especially just being that most of the guys were black males as well, because the reality is that the black struggle is hard. Male or female, it is a thing, and we are living it and getting through it in real time. So that was really something that really just kind of like reminded me why I do what I do.
Yeah, that's good. And that's also like I also have noticed that like when I first started my podcast, it was really mostly women who were talking. Like the whole idea of this podcast is to cut the small talk and like, tap into the whole vulnerable thing. And I've noticed that as of late, like a lot of men have been taking interest in speaking on my show. And so like that has also made me feel grateful because I have a lot of male friends and I know that they still kind of struggle with that whole oh, men gotta suck it up. Don't nobody really care about how I feel, blah, blah, blah. And so, like, I'm always looking for ways to, like, hold space for my male friends. Um, because, like I said, like you said, the struggle is hard and they don't really like to speak up about stuff. So, yeah, I'm really happy. I'm rooting for all of us, but I'm really rooting for, like, more of the men to come out of their shell and just talk more and be more vulnerable. Because I feel like it's beneficial for everybody.
For sure, for sure. I will say though, the men have been showing out for Men's Mental Health Month.
No, for real.
They
For
have been like
real.
that came out of nowhere, and I was like, okay,
They have
okay,
been.
I see my black men talking. Okay,
Yeah, facts. Facts. But I'm okay. My first closing cue for you is what inspires you the most?
that's a good one. One of the things that really inspires me the most is knowing that I inspire other people. Um, a lot of the work that I do is not for me, right? Like it started as a thing that was like for myself, but now it's a thing that I do really for like the sake of other people. And so I think that's something that inspires me and also just kind of like motivates me to keep going. It's just the idea that what I'm doing is going to benefit somebody.
I like that answer. That's a good one. And that's also a good feeling to have as well. How do you recharge?
Recharging for me definitely looks like the self-care days, like I said.
Hmm.
Um, Also, one thing I've really been trying to get on myself about is rest. Um, as an insomniac and somebody who also has a full schedule, sometimes it's kind of hard to just like turn off the whole like just the whole mindset of having to always be in motion, right? Always having to work on something, always having to do something. And I think for me, especially how I've been recharging lately, is just trying to take those 30-minute naps, trying to just sit down in silence and wind down, putting my phone down when I walk in the house for 30 minutes and just, you know, letting my mind be free from all the things. I mean, it's so many different ways, but that's really what's been working for me lately. And it's really, really been working. I think that when you are disciplined enough to really just tell yourself that you need to sit down, eventually you will be able to sit down. I mean, I went from not having naps to taking 10, like 15, 30-minute naps. So, those are little milestones for me. So,
That's good. That's good. What's something you're currently unlearning?
Mm, that's a good one. I like these questions. Something I am currently unlearning. I think something for me would definitely be like, I think that a lot of times we don't realize that we are products of our environment until we kind of just take a step back and see ourselves doing the things that we don't like in other people. Um, and so I think for me, something that I have been unlearning is really just honing in on not mirroring behaviors, right? And of course, like some things are involuntary, but that starts with, making sure that I'm not around the things that I don't want to mirror in myself. Not tolerating friendships with people who don't actually treat me like a friend. I mean, it looks like so many different things, but that's really it for me. Um, really just trying to unlearn those bad habits and taking a step back, like, hey, you know, you were wrong in this moment, or, you know, you reacted in a way that you shouldn't have reacted, or like I got out of character. How do I like, become better at that? And also make sure that like as I'm trying to better myself, I'm not surrounding myself around energies that make that counterproductive.
What's something you think is underrated?
Nature walks. I think that nature walks are underrated. Like, because I mean, vitamin D literally gives us energy, right? But I think that people need to, we live in an age where like technology is such a big thing and, day parties, drinking, all that type of stuff. Sometimes I just want people, like, I'm always saying on my close friends, it's a nice day outside. Everybody needs to go outside for at least 5 minutes and just let your body soak up the sunlight. I think that that's a really underrated thing, because like a lot of people just don't do those things that we used to do. Like, when I was a kid, I used to always go outside and play, go to the playground and spend a whole bunch of outdoors time. And I mean, people just don't do that anymore.
Hmm.
And I think that those are the things that help us recharge, refresh our minds and also just become, one with nature. Like, now you see so many people getting into like astrology and things like that because like spirituality somehow has become some sort of trend. But, within that, take yourself outside, put the phone down, take yourself outside and hug a tree or something.
What do you want to leave this world with? Like your legacy?
Um, my legacy for me would just look like just being a true trailblazer, right? Just continuing to inspire people, raise awareness for mental health and provide safe spaces. I think that when I leave this earth, right, just knowing that I inspired people to be better, I inspired people to inspire other people to be better, and just being able to put people in these spaces and in these rooms where they can thrive is really just what it's all about for me.
And the last question is, what are you most thankful for?
Um, I would say that something that I am most thankful for in general is just life. Um, a lot of people don't know this, but I really didn't think that I was going to live past 18, um, because I didn't anticipate continuing life after 18. And so I think for me, something that I'm really thankful for is just not pulling the plug on myself, um, and just being patient with like what my future had in store for me and what still is transpiring and going on. Um, because if it weren't for that, I mean, I wouldn't be here today. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of my friends were actually um speaking on this topic, and it's so crazy because I feel like a lot of us have had, like, you know how people be saying like, oh, we all live the same life but we just in different bodies. But I feel like everybody has had that thought at some point. Like, I've even had that thought at some point, and I've had that thought at a very young age, which I thought was very strange for me. It's like, if I didn't continue on when I didn't want to continue on, I feel like I would be sick right now. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like I would be like, damn, like I really wish that, like, just living my life now, and like the fact that like I feel so differently about life than I did before. I would be sick. Like, dang, I ended it, but I really should have been more patient with just like myself and like my circumstances and everything to see the end of my, like, the, the continuation of my journey.
Yeah, for sure. I think that when I think of it, I always think of it as, have you ever rode on like on the highway, right? And you drive through a crazy storm
Yeah.
and there's like three cars that pull over on the side of the road and stop in the middle of the storm. But then there's the other people who continue going through the storm. And as you continue to drive through the storm, you realize once you get up that hill, the storm is gone. And so I think that's kind of like how I see it as well. Like you just got to keep going through the storm. You know, you really have to weather through the storm. Like it may look like it's a lot, in that moment, but if you just continue to fight through it, like you will get through it for real.
Facts. And I think like another thing that we really should continue to have in our mind is impermanence. Like, nothing is forever. Every phase, every cycle, whether it's a good one or a bad one, will come to an end at some point. So, like you said, you just got to keep going, cuz eventually like that cycle will change, that phase will change, and there will be something after that that you're not going to know about if stop and you just give up. But I do want to say that I am happy that you're here, and I'm happy that I met you, and I fucks with you. Keep doing what you're doing. Let
Oh, I
every
fuck with you too. And I'm glad we met as well.
Yes.
I literally just wore my evil eye hat the other day, and I remembered that that was like the first thing I got from you. Like,
Yeah. I remember that. That was at the picnic, right?
yeah. But I love that it's an evil eye hat because I feel like you are so like, shoo, goodbye. Like, if you're not cool, you'd be like, yeah, nah, I'm good.
Yeah, you just gotta be filling people's lives out.
Yeah, gotta feel the vibes and shake them off.
Facts. But let everybody know what you got going on and where they can find you so that they can tap in with what you're doing.
Of course, of course. So I do have something new coming up. Actually, tomorrow, Revive will be dropping. This is my first body scrub.
Okay.
Yeah, so if y'all need some organic self-care products, definitely come shop. That's a lemon oat scrub dropping tonight for the people who sign up on the mailing list, so you know. But you guys can follow me on Instagram at grain of ARCANE. My website is the same, Grain of Arcane. And yeah, if y'all want to see what upcoming events I have going on, make sure y'all subscribe to the mailing list. Because I do post like upcoming events and just like notifications on other things that are going on, whether it's like any events that I have that I'm hosting or popping up at, or even just like exclusive discounts and stuff. So make sure y'all lock in with me. And yeah.
Yes, definitely make sure you tap in. I'm pretty sure that when you go and you find her profile, there's something that you can do. Like, there's a way that y'all can connect. Like I said, this is a multi-faceted business, so there's something there for everybody, I feel like. But that concludes our episode for today. Thank you everyone for listening, and stay tuned for another one.